The capture. Ethan's heart raced as he stumbled through the dark forest. He had been running for hours, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The sound of alien footsteps echoed behind him, a reminder of the creatures that had been hunting him since his ship crash-landed on this strange, distant planet. Every brush of wind, every snap of a twig beneath his foot made him jump. The Xalrith were relentless. They'd never stopped chasing him. And now he could feel their presence closer than ever. It had started as an ordinary mission. Ethan had been a part of a space exploration team sent to survey a newly discovered planet. The planet was beautiful, full of life, and unlike anything they had seen before. The surface shimmered with strange plants and towering trees, while the skies were painted with hues of purple and orange. But when his ship malfunctioned and crashed in the middle of this alien world, things quickly turned from bad to worse. At first, the planet seemed peaceful, quiet, but Ethan soon discovered it was anything but. The Xalrith, a terrifying and mysterious alien species, controlled this planet. They had ruled it for centuries, and their power was unmatched. The Xalrith were tall, with dark, shimmering skin and glowing eyes that pierced through the night. They were known for their intelligence and cruelty, and it didn't take long for Ethan to realize that they saw humans as nothing more than tools for their rituals. The Xalrith had captured several of his crewmates, using them for experiments and sacrifices to their ancient gods. Ethan had narrowly escaped their clutches once, but he knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up with him. As he continued to run through the thick jungle, he tried to think of a plan. But the alien creatures were everywhere, and his options were growing slimmer by the minute. Ethan's foot caught on a root, and he tumbled forward, landing hard on the ground. His body screamed in pain, but he didn't have time to rest. With a grunt, he pushed himself back to his feet and glanced around. The dark forest seemed to close in on him, the trees towering above like silent giants. He had to find shelter, but the nearest cave was too far. And then there was the matter of the Xalrith who were hunting him. He could hear them now, their voices low and guttural, speaking in a language he didn't understand. They were getting closer. Panic surged through Ethan's veins, but he knew he couldn't let it control him. He had to think. He had to survive. But no matter how hard he tried to focus, his mind kept racing back to the terrifying images of his crew, who had been taken by the Xalrith. The thought of being next made his heart beat faster. Suddenly, a chilling howl pierced the air. Ethan froze, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. The Xalrith were near. He could hear the rustling of leaves as they moved through the underbrush. And then, just as he thought he might escape, a large net fell from above, ensnaring him in its trap. The world spun as he struggled against the tight ropes that wrapped around his body. "Not again," he whispered, panic flooding his chest. But the more he struggled, the tighter the net became, and soon, Ethan was pinned to the ground, unable to move. He could hear the footsteps of the Xalrith approaching, their slow, deliberate steps signaling his capture. The tension in the air was suffocating, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Ethan tried to calm his racing heart, knowing that panicking wouldn't help. He had to be smart, patient, and wait for the right moment. But there was no denying the reality of his situation. He was captured. Again. A group of Xalrith emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes scanning the area. Ethan's body froze in fear as they approached, their tall, imposing figures casting long shadows in the dim light. They circled him, their eyes filled with curiosity and malice. They spoke to each other in their strange, alien language, their voices low and menacing. Ethan couldn't understand what they were saying, but the tone was enough to tell him that his fate was sealed. They were going to sacrifice him. He had seen it happen to others before. The Xalrith priests, who led the ceremony, were always calm and calculating. They believed in the power of their ancient rituals and had never hesitated to make sacrifices to their gods. Ethan had heard stories of what they did to humans, of how they used their captives in terrifying rituals, meant to ensure the survival of their species. He had seen the remains of those who didn't make it out alive. Twisted, unrecognizable bodies left as offerings. But Ethan wasn't just any human. He was different. He had been trained for situations like this. His mind raced for solutions, but every plan he thought of seemed impossible. The Xalrith were too powerful, their technology too advanced. Escape was a distant dream. The head priest stepped forward, his tall form looming over Ethan. He bent down, examining the human closely, as if studying his every movement. Ethan's heart pounded, and a chill ran down his spine. This was it. This was the moment that could end his life. The priest whispered something to the others, and they nodded, their eyes glowing in the dark. But just as Ethan resigned himself to the inevitable, something strange happened. The air around them seemed to grow still, as if the forest was holding its breath. The priest's hand froze midair, and his eyes widened, as if he had sensed something unknown. Ethan didn't know what was happening, but it was clear that something was shifting. The ritual wasn't going according to plan, and in that moment of uncertainty, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if there was still a chance for him to survive this. Could it be possible that fate had a different plan for him? Something beyond the grasp of the Xalrith. The suspense hung in the air like a thick fog, and the Xalrith priests, sensing the change, began to whisper among themselves, uncertain of what would happen next. The stage was set for something far bigger than Ethan had ever imagined. And little did he know, this was only the beginning of a story that would change the fate of the galaxy itself. The ancient ritual. The tension in the air was thick, so heavy that it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. Ethan was bound, lying helpless on the cold stone floor of the alien temple. The ancient structure loomed overhead, its walls covered with strange symbols and glowing, pulsating lights. The whole atmosphere felt otherworldly, and every detail sent a chill through Ethan's bones. It had been mere moments since the Xalrith captured him, but the oppressive weight of their rituals had already begun to settle on his chest. This was not just any ceremony. This was their most sacred of rituals, one that had been performed countless times by their ancestors, and now Ethan was its unwilling participant. The priests stood in a circle around him, their movements precise and methodical. Tall and imposing, their glowing eyes cast eerie, sharp reflections across the stone walls. They were dressed in dark ceremonial robes that rippled as they chanted in unison. The sound was strange and rhythmic, like a distant, haunting melody that vibrated in the very air, sinking deep into Ethan's consciousness. The Xalrith believed their gods would hear their prayers through these incantations, and their faith was as strong as it was terrifying. Ethan struggled against his restraints, but the ropes were too tight. His limbs ached from the pressure, and the cold stone against his skin only intensified the discomfort. His heart beat erratically, thumping painfully in his chest as the realization of his fate hit him harder with each passing second. The Xalrith had done this many times before. They didn't just sacrifice their captives. They believed this ritual was necessary to preserve their species, and once the ceremony began, there was no stopping it. The air around him seemed to shimmer, and the ground beneath him hummed as though it, too, was alive. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. There had to be something, anything that could give him a chance to escape. But as his eyes scanned the room, he saw no way of freeing himself. The doors to the temple were guarded, the priests surrounding him were too many, and he had no weapons. All hope seemed to drain from him as the priests continued their chant. A tall elder priest stepped forward, his voice rising above the rest of the chorus. The Xalrith's leader, the high priest, was the most formidable of them all. His presence was suffocating, like a shadow that stretched across the room, consuming everything in its path. He raised his hands, and the chanting ceased. The room grew silent, the eerie hum of the temple stilling with it. All eyes turned to the high priest, who stared down at Ethan with cold, unblinking eyes. The moment stretched on, unbearable, as Ethan felt every part of his body tense up. "You are the sacrifice," the high priest finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. Each word seemed to hang in the air like a death sentence. "The gods demand your life. Your fate is sealed." Ethan's throat tightened. The Xalrith had always believed in the power of their gods to determine life and death. They thought that by sacrificing a human, they would ensure their survival. Ethan, like the others before him, was nothing more than a pawn in their ritual. But even in the face of certain death, there was a flicker of defiance in his heart. As the high priest lifted the ceremonial dagger high above Ethan's chest, the air around them thickened with tension. Ethan's eyes were fixed on the blade, his breath shallow. The tip of the weapon gleamed in the dim light, and for a moment, he could have sworn he felt the cold steel even from this distance. He had seen this before. He had heard the stories of what the Xalrith did to humans. This was the end. His mind flashed to his crew, to the mission they had set out on. What a waste it had all been. But just as the high priest prepared to strike, something unexpected happened. A sudden, deep rumble shook the temple. The floor trembled, and the walls vibrated as if something immense was shifting beneath the earth itself. The Xalrith priests froze, their eyes darting around the room in alarm. For a brief, fleeting moment, the chanting resumed, but there was something in it that was different, chaotic, erratic, as though the very foundation of their ritual was being disrupted. The Xalrith leader's face twisted in confusion. He glanced at his fellow priests, unsure of what was happening. Ethan's heart raced as the rumbling grew louder, more intense. It felt as though the temple was alive, its walls creaking and groaning, the very structure beginning to buckle under the pressure of an unseen force. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the trembling stopped. The room fell into an unnerving silence. And then something even more unsettling occurred. A voice, not human, not even Xalrith, echoed through the room, booming with a strange resonance. It seemed to come from everywhere, yet nowhere. The voice was ancient, deep, and powerful, like a force that had existed before time itself. "Stop." The single word reverberated through Ethan's mind, shaking him to his core. The high priest lowered his weapon slowly, his eyes wide with disbelief. The other priests turned to one another in confusion, muttering in their alien tongue. The force of the oracle's voice was undeniable. It was an overwhelming presence, something the Xalrith had never encountered before. "Who speaks?" the high priest demanded, his voice shaky. Ethan, though still bound and helpless, felt a strange sense of hope flicker inside him. This was no ordinary voice. It was the voice of something powerful, something ancient, and for the first time since his capture, he felt that perhaps there was a chance for him to escape. But the priests, despite their confusion, were not easily deterred. The oracle's voice responded again, and this time it spoke directly to Ethan, though the Xalrith could not hear it. "You are destined for something far greater than they can comprehend," it said. "The sacrifice they seek will not come to pass." The room fell into chaos as the priests struggled to understand what was happening. The high priest clenched his fists, clearly angry at the disruption of his sacred ceremony. But Ethan could feel something changing. Something was unfolding within him, and he could not explain it. For the first time in what felt like forever, the fear that had gripped him began to fade, replaced by a sense of curiosity and awe. Who, or what, was this oracle, and what did it want with him? Was this the sign he had been waiting for? The oracle's voice. The silence that followed the oracle's declaration was unbearable. Ethan lay there, still bound by the Xalrith's ancient ropes, his mind racing. The priests stood frozen in place, their eyes wide with shock and confusion, as if they could not comprehend what had just happened. The high priest, leader of this sacred ritual, opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, there was only the echo of the oracle's voice reverberating through the air, deep and powerful. "Stop," the voice commanded again, this time with a sense of finality that seemed to freeze the very air in the room. It was not just a command. It was a force of nature, an undeniable presence that pushed against the Thalrith's will. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he strained against his restraints, trying to understand what was happening. For the first time since his capture, he felt a glimmer of hope, something he had thought impossible moments earlier. The high priest, after a long tense pause, lowered his ceremonial dagger. The blade, which had gleamed so menacingly above Ethan's chest, now hovered in the air, trembling slightly as if even it was affected by the oracle's power. His eyes flicked back and forth, his mind clearly scrambling to make sense of the situation. He glanced over his shoulder at the other priests, who stood just as still, their faces a mixture of disbelief and fear. Ethan could see the turmoil in their expressions. The Thalrith were not creatures of superstition. They were a species that believed in science, technology, and control. But this was beyond their understanding. The oracle had interrupted their most sacred ritual, one they had performed countless times. It was unheard of. And yet, here it was, commanding them to stop. "What is this?" the high priest finally managed to whisper, his voice laced with both awe and fear. He turned to his fellow priests, who muttered in their strange language, eyes darting around the room, as if searching for the source of the oracle's voice. The oracle's presence filled the temple like a thick fog, overwhelming and inescapable. It wasn't just the voice that was powerful, it was the feeling that accompanied it, the sheer force of something ancient and untamable, like the very essence of the universe itself was speaking through it. Ethan could feel it too. The air around him seemed to pulse, as if the fabric of reality itself was being stretched and twisted by the oracle's will. It was as if the oracle had always been there, watching, waiting, ready to intervene. Ethan's body trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming energy that surrounded him. His mind buzzed with questions. Who was this oracle? How had it known to speak to him? And most importantly, why? Why was he being chosen? His thoughts were interrupted when the oracle spoke again, this time directly to him. The voice was softer this time, more intimate, but no less powerful. "You are not meant to die here, human," the oracle said, its voice filling his mind, clear and resonant. "Your path is greater than the sacrifice they planned for you." Ethan's eyes widened as the words sank in. His mouth went dry as the weight of the oracle's message hit him. A part of him wanted to ask why. Why him? But no words came out. It was as though the oracle had already anticipated every question he could ask, every doubt he could have. The high priest, his face now twisted with a mix of confusion and anger, snapped back to reality. "This is an affront to the gods," he shouted, his voice rising in fury. "You are not to be spared. You are nothing but an offering." He raised his hands to the sky, as if to summon the full wrath of the gods, but the oracle's voice cut him off, sharp and unyielding. "Enough," the oracle commanded. "Your gods are not real. They are but shadows of a past long forgotten. The time of your rituals has ended. This human is not your sacrifice. He is your savior." The words echoed through the temple, each one carrying with it a weight that seemed to shake the very ground beneath Ethan's body. The priests were visibly shaken, some stepping back in fear, others exchanging uncertain glances. The high priest's face contorted with disbelief. "Savior," he whispered, as if the word itself was foreign to him. Ethan, still lying on the cold stone floor, could hardly believe what he was hearing. Savior. Was the oracle talking about him? Could it be true? He had never thought of himself as anything special. He was just a soldier, a part of a mission that had gone horribly wrong. And yet now he was being told that he was somehow meant to save these creatures. These terrifying, powerful beings who had already decided his fate. But the oracle's voice remained steady, unwavering. "Yes, human, you are more than you know. The blood that runs through your veins is the key to a power long lost to this galaxy. You are connected to something much greater than yourself. Your survival is no accident. You are destined for this moment." Ethan closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of the oracle's words. It was almost too much to take in. Was he truly part of some ancient prophecy? Was he really the key to changing the future of these alien beings, and perhaps the galaxy itself? His mind spun with the possibilities. But amidst the confusion, one thing became clear. If the oracle was right, he had been brought here for a reason, and somehow he was going to have to find out what that reason was. The high priest, visibly shaken by the oracle's words, stepped back, lowering his weapon. "We will not listen to this madness," he snarled, but even as he spoke, his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. The oracle had shaken them, broken the foundations of their beliefs. There was doubt in their eyes now, and that doubt was more dangerous than any weapon that Xalrith possessed. Ethan, still trapped in the ropes that bound him, could feel the tension in the room shift. It was as though that Xalrith had been rattled, their confidence shattered. And yet, in the midst of their confusion, something inside Ethan stirred, a force he couldn't explain, but one that felt familiar, as though it had always been there, waiting to be awakened. As the high priest and his followers argued amongst themselves, the oracle's voice spoke again, this time more urgently, more pressing. "Time is running out," the oracle warned. "The Xalrith are doomed to repeat their mistakes unless you act. The path before you is fraught with danger, but you must walk it. There is no turning back now." The gravity of the oracle's words hung in the air, and Ethan knew, deep down, that his journey was just beginning. This was no longer just about survival. It was about something far larger, something that could change the fate of an entire world. And Ethan, against all odds, was the one chosen to lead it. The oracle had spoken. Now it was up to him to decide what he would do next. Would he rise to the challenge, or would he succumb to the fate that Xalrith had planned for him? The decision, and the future of the galaxy, was in his hands. The revelation. The room was thick with uncertainty. The Xalrith priests stood motionless, their eyes wide with disbelief, as if they were struggling to comprehend the oracle's words. The high priest, once so sure of his position, now seemed smaller, almost vulnerable, as he looked up to the heavens, as though waiting for divine intervention. The oracle's declaration had shattered everything they knew. Ethan, still bound on the cold stone floor, felt a strange sense of power rising within him. The oracle had told him he was not the sacrifice. But more than that, it had told him he was something more, something greater. The high priest's voice was shaking with frustration. "This cannot be. The oracle lies," he roared, his words echoing off the temple's ancient walls. "The gods are real, and they will not be denied. The ritual must continue." But Ethan could see it now. The doubt in the high priest's eyes, the uncertainty in his movements. The oracle's words had cracked the foundation of their beliefs, and now they were scrambling to hold onto their power, to restore their shattered sense of control. But it was clear that Xalrith's faith in their gods was slipping away, replaced by fear of something they couldn't understand. As the high priest ranted, the air around Ethan seemed to grow warmer, more charged, as if something inside him was awakening. The oracle's words reverberated in his mind. "You are the key to a power long lost to this galaxy." He didn't understand it fully, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no ordinary human. There was something deep inside him, something waiting to be unlocked. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was the key to not only saving himself, but to saving the galaxy from the Xalrith's destruction. The oracle's voice, calm and soothing, filled his thoughts once again. "Ethan, you must listen. Your bloodline is not what you think it is. You are a descendant of the ancient protectors, a race long thought to be extinct. The Xalrith were once your allies, but their lust for power led them astray. They are blind to the truth. Only you can show them the path." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Protectors. He had never heard of such a race. He was just a man, ordinary, unremarkable. At least that's what he had always believed. His past was simple. He was a soldier, a part of a space exploration crew. He had never imagined he had any connection to something as grand as an ancient order of protectors. The oracle was telling him something he had never thought possible. His heritage, his bloodline, was linked to something far more powerful than anything the Xalrith could ever comprehend. Your ancestors were the guardians of this galaxy, the oracle continued, its voice unwavering. They fought to keep the balance of power, to protect all life from those who would seek to destroy it. The Xalrith were once part of that alliance. But in their arrogance, they turned against you, seeking to claim power that was never meant for them. And now, they are on the brink of destruction. Ethan's mind raced, trying to process the oracle's words. His heart pounded in his chest as he thought back to the mission that had brought him here. He had never imagined that something as simple as a crash landing on an unknown planet could set off a chain of events that would lead to the revelation of his true purpose. But now, in the depths of the alien temple, surrounded by hostile beings who saw him as nothing more than a tool for their rituals, Ethan understood one undeniable truth. His survival was not a coincidence. He had been brought here for a reason. The priests began to argue among themselves again, their voices rising in anger and fear. They didn't understand what was happening. The high priest's grip tightened on his ceremonial dagger, but now his movements seemed more desperate, more uncertain. He raised the blade high once more, but before he could strike, the oracle's voice echoed through the room with such force that it seemed to shake the very stones beneath them. "Do not challenge fate, Xalrith," the oracle warned. "Your time has passed. The balance has already begun to shift. Ethan is the last of the protectors, and it is he who will decide the fate of your people." The high priest froze, his hand trembling. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. He lowered the blade slowly, unable to meet the oracle's gaze. The other priests stepped back, their faces pale, unsure of what to do next. The power of the oracle was undeniable. It was not just speaking through the air. It was speaking directly to their souls, overwhelming them with the weight of its truth. Ethan lay there, still bound, trying to come to terms with what he had just learned. The weight of the oracle's words hung heavily on his shoulders. He had been a soldier, trained for combat, for survival, but he was not prepared for this. He wasn't prepared for the responsibility that had just been thrust upon him. The last of the protectors. The thought echoed in his mind. He had never asked for this. He had never wanted to be a savior, a leader. But now, with the Xalrith's fate, and perhaps the fate of the entire galaxy, resting in his hands, there was no turning back. The oracle's voice softened, almost gentle now. "You are not alone, Ethan. The power within you is dormant, but it is yours to command. You must find the artifact, an ancient relic of the protectors that lies hidden on this planet. It is the key to unlocking your full potential." Ethan's mind whirled. The artifact. He had no idea what the oracle was talking about. He had only just learned of his connection to the protectors, and now he was being told to find an ancient relic, a key to unlocking his true power. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. This planet was full of secrets, and perhaps it was here, in the very heart of the Xalrith's sacred temple, that the answers lay. "You must leave this place, Ethan," the oracle continued. "The Xalrith will never let you go willingly. They will stop at nothing to maintain their control. You must act quickly, before it is too late." As the oracle's voice faded, a sense of clarity washed over Ethan. The path ahead was unclear, filled with danger and uncertainty, but it was the only path that mattered. The oracle had given him a purpose, and though he didn't fully understand it yet, he knew he had no choice but to follow it. The room around him felt colder now, the air heavy with the knowledge that the Xalrith had no idea what was coming. But Ethan did, and though his heart was heavy with the weight of his newfound destiny, a spark of hope flickered deep inside him. There was more to him than he had ever imagined, and it was time to find out just how far that power could take him. With the priests still hesitant and divided, Ethan's resolve hardened. He would survive. He would fight. and he would uncover the secrets that would not only save him but change the course of the galaxy itself. The escape plan. The temple had grown eerily still after the Oracle's last command, but for Ethan, the silence was anything but peaceful. His heart thudded in his chest as he lay there, bound by the Xalrith's ropes, surrounded by a group of priests who were now clearly rattled, uncertain, and divided. The high priest, still holding his ceremonial dagger, glanced nervously at his followers, his eyes flicking to Ethan, as if contemplating the Oracle's warning. His grip on the blade tightened, but there was no conviction in his stance anymore. Ethan could see that the priests, once so sure of their control, were now questioning everything they believed. Ethan's mind, on the other hand, was racing with plans. The Oracle had given him a purpose, a path that he had no choice but to follow. The artifact, the relic that could unlock his true power, was somewhere on this planet, and if he was to survive, it was the key to his freedom. But finding it wouldn't be easy. The Xalrith were not fools. They were ancient and powerful, their technology far beyond anything he had ever encountered. But if there was one thing he knew about these creatures, it was that they underestimated humans, and they had just made their first fatal mistake, underestimating him. The ropes that bound his wrists were tight, painfully so, but Ethan could feel the strength within him growing, responding to the Oracle's words. Something deep inside him was waking up. It was a strange, electric feeling, like his body had just come alive, in a way it never had before. It was the power the Oracle had spoken of, and he could feel it coursing through his veins, though it was still raw and unrefined. He wasn't sure how it worked, or how to control it, but he could sense that it was there, within him, just waiting to be unlocked. As the priests continued to argue amongst themselves, their voices low but heated, Ethan focused on his restraints. He knew he had to act quickly. The longer he lay there, the more time the Xalrith had to recover their confidence, and once that happened, they would resume their ritual. The idea of being their sacrifice once again gnawed at him, but he pushed the thought away. He had more important things to focus on. In the corner of the room, a large stone altar sat, covered in alien markings that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Ethan knew this was where they had intended to carry out the ritual, where his life would have ended. But now, that altar would be his starting point, the first step in his escape. He focused on the ropes again, using every ounce of concentration he could muster. His wrists were raw from the struggle, but he could feel the strength building inside him, like a storm gathering just beneath his skin. Then, with one sharp twist of his wrists, the ropes holding him began to loosen. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but the more he focused on it, the more the ropes gave way. The Oracle had promised him power, and now he could feel it manifesting in ways he had never experienced before. His strength was no longer just physical. It was something deeper, something that connected him to the very energy of the temple itself. It was as if the temple, the Xalrith, and the Oracle were all linked by an invisible force that he was just beginning to tap into. A flicker of movement caught his eye. One of the priests, the youngest of them, stepped away from the group and turned his back on Ethan. He was muttering something to himself, his hands moving as if trying to grasp at an unseen presence. This was the opportunity Ethan had been waiting for. He could feel the moment was right. Without wasting another second, he shifted his position, his legs moving more fluidly than he had ever expected. With a swift, practiced movement, he tore through the remaining ropes that bound his arms. He felt the bindings snap and fall away, and in that moment, a rush of adrenaline surged through him. Ethan wasted no time. His body moved with a speed and precision he didn't fully understand, as if his very being was now in sync with the power that the Oracle had awakened within him. The young priest, who had turned his back to Ethan, never saw it coming. In a blur of motion, Ethan lunged forward, grabbing him by the arm and twisting it behind his back with an almost unnatural strength. The priest gasped in surprise and pain, but before he could react, Ethan had slammed him into the cold stone floor, knocking the wind out of him. The room froze in disbelief. The other priests turned quickly, their eyes wide with shock. They had expected Ethan to be helpless, trapped in the confines of his restraints. But now they saw something different in his eyes, something powerful, something they hadn't anticipated. "Get him," one of the priests shouted, his voice high with panic. But it was too late. Ethan's eyes locked onto the high priest, who had finally regained his composure. The ceremonial dagger still gleamed in his hand, but there was hesitation in his eyes. Ethan knew the oracle had been right. The Xal'Rith were not prepared for this. They had expected him to be just another human to sacrifice, to conquer. But he wasn't. And now, he was their worst nightmare. Before the high priest could react, Ethan reached out with a strength he had never known, his hand glowing faintly with an energy that seemed to come from within the very temple itself. The stone beneath their feet trembled, as if resonating with the energy he was now channeling. He wasn't sure how, but the oracle had said the power was his to command. And now, as the high priest lunged toward him, dagger raised, Ethan thrust his hand out. A burst of energy shot from his palm, and the high priest was thrown back, slamming into one of the temple's stone walls. He crumpled to the floor, dazed but alive. The other priests froze, terror filling their eyes as they looked at Ethan, who was now standing tall, his body crackling with raw power. Ethan didn't have time to celebrate. He had just made his escape, but this was only the beginning. He knew the Xal'Rith would not let him go easily. The power that flowed through him was strong, but it was also unpredictable. He had to find the artifact the oracle had mentioned, and quickly. Time was running out. Ethan looked around, scanning the temple for any sign of the relic. It had to be here. It had to be close. And just as he turned toward a hidden alcove in the far corner of the room, he saw it. There, tucked away in the shadows, was an ancient pedestal, adorned with the same symbols that marked the walls of the temple. Resting atop the pedestal was an object wrapped in soft, glowing light. The artifact. The key to his power. With a determined breath, Ethan moved toward it, every step resonating with purpose. He didn't know what was waiting for him beyond this point, but he knew one thing for certain. He would never go back to being the powerless human the Xal'Rith had thought him to be. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was his to walk. And he was ready. The battle for freedom. Ethan's fingers brushed the smooth surface of the artifact, and an electric shock of energy shot up his arm, sending a ripple of power through his entire body. The artifact pulsed with light, as if acknowledging his touch, its glow brighter and more intense with each passing second. Ethan's heart raced, not just from the surge of energy that now coursed through him, but from the realization that the Xal'Rith were not going to give up easily. The high priest was beginning to stir, and the others were regrouping, their weapons raised and their eyes filled with fury. The element of surprise was over. There was no going back now. The room was tense, the air heavy with the anticipation of the impending conflict. Ethan stood tall, feeling the weight of the power now at his fingertips. The artifact had awakened something inside him, something that felt more like a dormant force waiting to be unleashed than a new source of energy. He felt connected to it in a way he couldn't explain, as if it had always been a part of him, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The high priest, shaking off the effects of Ethan's earlier attack, rose to his feet, his face twisted in rage, his dark eyes burning with hatred. He motioned to the other priests, and they began to encircle Ethan, forming a tight, menacing ring. Their movements were synchronized, practiced. These were not just priests, but warriors, and they had been trained for situations like this. Foolish human. The high priest spat. You have no idea what you are doing. You think this power will save you. It will only bring your destruction. Ethan's grip tightened on the artifact, and for the first time, he could feel its true power, its potential. The artifact hummed in his hand, as if responding to his intent. It wasn't just an object of strength, it was an extension of himself. And now that it was awakened, there was no stopping him. You have no idea what I'm capable of, Ethan muttered under his breath, his voice steady. There was no fear now. There was only resolve. With a single motion, the high priest raised his hands, and the other priests followed suit, launching themselves at Ethan with unnatural speed. Their movements were fluid and deadly, but Ethan was faster now, the power surging within him, giving him reflexes that were sharper, his senses heightened. He could feel the flow of energy around him, the air vibrating with the force of it. The first priest lunged at him with a blade raised high, but Ethan was already moving. He sidestepped the attack, his body moving like liquid, fluid and precise. The priest's strike missed by inches, and before the Xalrith could react, Ethan's hand shot out, palm open. A burst of energy exploded from his fingertips, and the priest was thrown back, crashing into a stone pillar with a sickening thud. The room seemed to hold its breath, and for a moment, everything went silent. The remaining priests hesitated, fear creeping into their eyes. They had seen the power that Ethan wielded, but they were trained for battle. They were not easily deterred. One by one, they advanced, circling him like sharks, ready to strike. Ethan could feel the tension in the air. He knew they would come at him together, using their combined strength to overwhelm him. But the artifact, the power it gave him, had awakened something deep inside him. He was no longer just a human, no longer just a soldier. He was a force to be reckoned with. The power was his to control, and now that he understood it, he knew how to use it. As the first priest lunged again, Ethan raised his hands, focusing all the energy in his body into a single concentrated blast. The air around him crackled with energy, and the force of it sent a wave of power rippling outward. The priest was hit before he could even react, and he was sent flying across the room, crashing into the stone walls with a bone-jarring impact. Ethan's breath was steady as he watched the other priests falter, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They had never encountered anything like this before. They had underestimated him, believing him to be just another weak human to sacrifice, to control. But they were wrong. He was not just any human. He was a descendant of the ancient protectors. And now, he was here to take back what they had stolen from him. The high priest snarled, his face twisted with rage and fear. "You cannot defeat us, human. The power of the gods is on our side." But Ethan's eyes were steady, unwavering. "The gods have abandoned you," he said coldly. "Your power is built on lies, and it's time for it to end." With that, he charged forward, faster than the priests could react. The energy from the artifact surged through him, propelling him forward with a speed that left the Xalrith scrambling to keep up. The first priest attempted to block him, but Ethan's hand shot out, and a blast of energy sent him flying into the air, his body flailing before crashing to the ground in an unconscious heap. The high priest, now desperate, raised his dagger once more, his eyes wild with fury. "Die," he shouted, his voice hoarse. But Ethan was ready. He could feel the energy building inside him, pulsing with power. In that moment, he saw the high priest's every move before it happened. He could anticipate his strikes, his intentions. Time seemed to slow as Ethan focused all his energy into a single strike. He moved with precision, his hand shooting out to catch the high priest's wrist as the dagger descended. The high priest's eyes widened in shock as Ethan twisted his arm, forcing him to drop the weapon. Ethan's grip tightened, and with a surge of power, he pushed the high priest back, sending him crashing into the stone altar. The room shook with the force of the impact. The high priest groaned, disoriented, his body sprawled across the cold stone floor. The other priests had seen enough. They had underestimated Ethan, thinking him just another captive to sacrifice. But now, they saw the truth. This human was something more, something they could not defeat. As one, they backed away, their eyes full of fear, their weapons lowered. Ethan stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily, the artifact glowing in his hand. His mind was racing, but his body was calm, focused. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Xalrith were still a threat, And now that he had unlocked the power within him, he knew that his journey was just beginning. The oracle's words echoed in his mind. Time is running out. You must act quickly. Ethan turned toward the door, his eyes scanning the temple, now quiet and still. The battle for his freedom was over, but the real fight was about to begin. He had the power now, and he was going to use it to end the Xalrith's reign of terror, once and for all. The future revealed. The silence in the temple was deafening. The once proud Xalrith priests lay scattered across the cold stone floor, their bodies broken and their spirits shattered. Ethan stood in the center of the room, his breath steady, but his heart pounding with the aftermath of the battle. The power from the artifact still surged within him, coursing through his veins with a force that felt both foreign and familiar. He had never felt so alive, so connected to something greater than himself. The oracle's words still echoed in his mind, guiding him through the chaos that had just unfolded. Time is running out. You must act quickly. The weight of those words pressed heavily on him as he surveyed the temple. The Xalrith may have been defeated for now, but Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The true danger lay ahead. The Xalrith were not the only threat in the galaxy. The power he had unlocked with the artifact was just a glimpse of something far greater, a power that had been hidden for millennia, waiting for the right person to awaken it. Ethan looked down at the artifact in his hand. Its glow had softened, but the power within it remained strong. It was an ancient relic, a key to unlocking the potential of the Protectors, his ancestors. The Oracle had said that his bloodline was the last of the Protectors, guardians who had once kept balance in the galaxy. He had never understood it before, never believed it. But now, standing in the ruins of the temple, it all began to make sense. He wasn't just a soldier, a crash survivor. He was part of something much larger, a legacy of guardianship, of protecting the galaxy from the forces that would destroy it. But what did it all mean? What was his true purpose? And why had the Oracle chosen him? As these questions swirled in his mind, the temple around him seemed to come alive. The stone walls vibrated with an ancient energy, as if the very building recognized the awakening of the artifact's power. Ethan could feel it, the pulse of something deeper, a connection that ran through the temple and beyond. The Oracle's voice, calm and soothing, filled his mind once again. "You have done well, Ethan," the Oracle said, its voice echoing like a distant whisper, though it was clear and present in his thoughts. "The Xalrith will not recover from this blow, but they are not the only ones who threaten the balance of the galaxy. There are forces beyond your comprehension, entities that have watched over this galaxy since its birth. The Protectors were the guardians of all life, but their numbers dwindled, their power hidden. Now it is your turn to take up their mantle." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Guardians of all life? His ancestors, the Protectors, they had fought to keep balance, to prevent destruction. But what had happened to them? Why had they vanished? And why was he, the last of them, being called to rise? "The galaxy is in turmoil," the Oracle continued, its voice filled with a strange urgency. "The Xalrith are not the only empire that threatens to destroy the fragile peace between worlds. Others are rising. Forces older than time itself are stirring, and soon they will seek to claim the galaxy for themselves. But you, Ethan, you are the key to stopping them. The artifact you hold is a piece of a larger puzzle, and only you can unlock the rest. You must seek out the remnants of the Protectors, scattered across the galaxy. They are the only ones who can help you face the coming storm." The weight of the Oracle's words settled heavily on Ethan's shoulders. He felt the full extent of the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. He had thought that surviving the Xalrith's ritual was the end of his journey. But in reality, it had only been the beginning. He was no longer just a soldier or a survivor. He was a protector, the last of his kind, and the fate of the galaxy rested in his hands. The artifact pulsed in his grasp, as if in response to the Oracle's command. Ethan could feel the energy within it, the ancient power that had been locked away for so long. But he was not ready yet. The Oracle was right. He needed to seek out the remnants of the protectors, to learn how to harness the full extent of the power within him. He couldn't do it alone. He needed allies, guidance, and he needed time. With a deep breath, Ethan turned away from the fallen priests and looked toward the exit of the temple. The doors, which had once seemed so imposing, now felt insignificant. The real challenge lay ahead. He knew that the Xaurith were only the beginning. There were greater threats out there, forces far more dangerous than the ones he had just faced. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes scanning the horizon beyond the temple's stone walls. The world outside seemed unchanged, the sky still painted with hues of purple and orange, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. But beneath the surface, everything had shifted. He had unlocked something inside himself, something powerful. But it was just the first step. He was destined to lead, to protect, and to face the darkness that threatened the galaxy. As he walked through the temple's archway and into the unknown, the oracle's voice whispered one last time in his mind. "Your journey is far from over, Ethan. You will face trials, and you will face enemies. But know this, the galaxy is counting on you. The protectors are gone, but their legacy lives on in you. The time has come for you to rise, and to forge your own path." Ethan paused for a moment, looking back at the temple one last time. The battle for freedom was over, but the true fight was just beginning. The Xaurith were defeated, but there were far greater forces waiting in the shadows, forces that would stop at nothing to claim the galaxy for themselves. Ethan didn't know how he would face them, or what challenges lay ahead, but one thing was certain: he would not back down. He was the last of the protectors, and it was time for him to fulfill his destiny. With a final glance at the horizon, Ethan took his first step into the future, into the unknown. The galaxy was on the brink of chaos, and he was the only one who could stop it. The battle for the galaxy had only just begun, and Ethan would not fail. He would rise to meet the challenge, whatever it took.